The massive space station floated in the darkness between three dying stars, and its metal walls held over 2,000 students from across the known galaxy inside them. This was the Galactic Integration Academy, a place where young beings came to learn how to survive in a universe that showed no mercy to the weak. Ethan Cole stood at the window of his small dormitory room and watched the stars spin slowly past the reinforced glass. And he thought about how far he was from Earth and from everything he had ever known. He was 19 years old, one of only 3 humans ever admitted to this ancient institution, and every single day reminded him that he did not belong here. The morning alarm rang through the station with a sharp metallic tone, and Ethan gathered his tablet and his notes before walking into the corridor where dozens of alien students moved past him without a second glance. Some of them towered over him with bodies made of crystal and light, while others scuttled on multiple legs with shells that gleamed like polished armor. He made his way to Classroom 7, where Instructor Vornax waited with 4 muscular arms crossed over his broad chest. The Gorvathi teacher stood nearly 3 meters tall, and his gray skin was covered in ritual scars that told the story of battles won and enemies crushed beneath his feet. "Take your seats," Vornax commanded in a voice that rumbled like distant thunder, and the students obeyed without question because nobody wanted to draw his attention for the wrong reasons. Ethan slipped into his usual spot at the back corner of the room where he could observe without being observed, and he pulled out his tablet as the lesson began. Today they would study survival doctrine, the philosophy that guided almost every civilization in the galaxy. "The universe is not kind," Vornax began as he paced before the class with heavy footsteps that shook the floor. "And it does not care about your feelings or your hopes or your dreams. It rewards only the strong, and it destroys the weak without hesitation or remorse." The students listened with rapt attention because these words matched everything their own cultures had taught them. Strength was the only currency that mattered in a galaxy filled with predators and prey. Rethkes the Sauroch sat in the front row with his scales gleaming under the artificial lights, and his yellow eyes never left the instructor. His people were warriors who had conquered 3 star systems through pure physical dominance, and he believed in the doctrine of strength more than anyone else in the room. "Today we examine the predator-prey dynamic," Vornax continued as he activated the holographic display that filled the center of the room with images of creatures hunting and killing across 100 different worlds. "And we discuss why evolution favors those who take what they need without weakness slowing them down." The images showed terrible beauty in their violence, as massive beasts tore into smaller ones, and swarms of insects devoured everything in their path. This was the way of things, the natural order that had shaped every species in the galaxy. "When a creature is wounded," Vornax said, as he gestured to an image of a limping herbivore being circled by predators, "it becomes a burden to its herd and a target for hunters. The merciful thing is to cull it quickly so resources are not wasted on something that cannot contribute." Ethan felt his stomach turn as he listened to these words, and before he could stop himself, his hand rose into the air. Every eye in the room turned toward him, and he felt the weight of their stares pressing down on his shoulders. "You have a question, human?" Vornax asked, with a tone that suggested questions were not welcome. "I was just wondering," Ethan said carefully, as he tried to keep his voice steady, "why wounded creatures always have to be culled. Could they not be healed instead and return to strength?" Silence fell over the classroom like a heavy blanket, and then the laughter began. It started with Rethkes, whose hissing chuckles spread through the room until nearly every student was making some version of amusement at the human's foolish words. "Healed?" Rethkes repeated as he turned in his seat to look at Ethan with open contempt in his reptilian eyes. "Why would anyone waste resources on something broken when you could simply replace it with something whole?" "Because," Ethan replied as he felt heat rising in his cheeks, "the wounded creature is still alive and still capable of feeling pain. Does that not matter? More laughter filled the room, and Rethkis shook his head slowly, as if he was dealing with a particularly stupid child. "The soft one speaks," he announced to the class, with mockery dripping from every word, "and he reveals why humans are considered the weakest species to ever reach the stars. You care about pain and feelings while the rest of us care about results." Vornax raised one of his four hands, and the laughter stopped immediately, but the instructor's face showed no sympathy for Ethan. Instead, there was something like disappointment in his deep-set eyes. "Human emotions are well documented," Vornax said as he looked at Ethan with clinical interest. "And your species' attachment to compassion has puzzled xenobiologists for generations. Most civilizations evolve past such inefficient impulses within their first million years of development." "Maybe we kept it for a reason," Ethan said quietly, and he was not sure where the courage to speak came from, but he could not take the words back now. "Or maybe," Vornax replied as he turned back to his display, "you simply have not evolved enough to let it go. Time will tell if your species survives long enough to learn what the rest of us already know." The lesson continued, but Ethan could not focus on the words anymore. He felt the eyes of his classmates on him, judging him, dismissing him as something less than they were. When the class ended, he gathered his things and walked toward the door. But Rethkis blocked his path with arms folded across his scaled chest. "A word of advice, soft one," the Sauroch said with his face inches from Ethan's. "Keep your human weakness to yourself before it gets you killed. This is not your gentle Earth where everything is safe and comfortable." Ethan said nothing as he stepped around Rethkis and walked into the corridor, and he kept his head high even though every part of him wanted to shrink away and disappear. At the far end of the hallway, a student named Thessaly watched him go with curious eyes. She was a Vethri, a species of hollow-boned avian beings who valued observation over action, and she had noticed something the others had missed. The human had not backed down. He had spoken his truth even when the entire room turned against him, and there was a kind of strength in that which had nothing to do with muscles or claws or scales. She tucked her wings close to her body and made a note in her personal journal before walking away. The human was interesting, and she had learned long ago that interesting things were worth watching closely. 3 weeks passed at the academy, and Ethan learned to keep his head down and his mouth shut. He attended his classes and completed his assignments and tried very hard not to draw attention to himself, but the damage had already been done. The other students called him the Soft One now, a nickname that followed him through the corridors and into the cafeteria, and even into his dreams at night. Rethkis had made sure everyone knew about the foolish human who thought wounded creatures deserved healing instead of death. Ethan ate his meals alone at a small table in the corner of the dining hall, and he pretended not to notice the whispers and the laughter that surrounded him like a cloud. He had come to this academy to prove that humans belonged among the stars, but instead he was becoming a joke. On this particular morning, the announcement system crackled to life with the voice of Instructor Vornax echoing through every room on the station. "All students in advanced xenobiology will report to Laboratory 4 for a live demonstration," the voice commanded, "and attendance is mandatory with no exceptions." Ethan gathered his things and made his way to the laboratory with a growing sense of dread in his stomach. Live demonstrations at this academy rarely ended well for the creatures involved. Laboratory 4 was a large circular room with tiered seating arranged around a central platform, and Ethan found a spot near the top where he could see everything without being seen. The other students filed in with excited chatter about what they might witness. Today, Vornax stood at the center of the platform with a metal cage beside him, and inside the cage something small and furry moved with nervous energy. It was a Bryn, a 6-legged mammalian creature about the size of a large dog, with soft brown fur and gentle dark eyes. "Today we examine the practical applications of efficiency doctrine," Vornax announced as he gestured toward the cage. "And this specimen will serve as our example." The Bryn pressed itself against the far side of the cage and made soft, whimpering sounds that reminded Ethan of a frightened puppy. He noticed immediately that the creature was favoring its front left leg, holding it close to its body as if movement caused pain. "This cargo animal was injured during transport," Vornax explained as he opened the cage and pulled the struggling creature onto the examination table. "And standard protocol dictates immediate euthanasia for damaged livestock. Today you will observe the procedure and understand why resources must never be wasted on inefficient specimens." Ethan felt his heart pounding in his chest as he watched the Bryn tremble on the cold metal table. It looked up at the faces surrounding it with pure terror in its eyes. And he knew that this creature understood exactly what was about to happen. "The injection will be quick and painless," Vornax continued as he prepared a syringe filled with pale blue liquid. "And the body will be recycled for biological research materials. This is the way of things throughout the civilized galaxy." The words left Ethan's mouth before his brain could stop them. "Wait!" he called out as he stood up from his seat, and every head in the room turned toward him with expressions ranging from curiosity to contempt. Vornax lowered the syringe and looked up at the human with his forearms spread wide in a gesture of impatient questioning. "You have something to add, human?" the instructor asked with danger lurking beneath his calm voice. "The injury does not look severe," Ethan said as he walked down the tiered seating toward the platform. "And I believe I could treat it if you would allow me the chance. The creature does not need to die." Laughter erupted from the students, and Rethke slapped his scaled hand against his knee with amusement. "The soft one wants to play doctor," the Sauroch announced loudly. "And he thinks bandaging a piece of livestock will somehow prove that humans are not the weak little creatures everyone knows them to be." "Why do you care about this animal?" asked a Kethra student whose compound eyes glittered with genuine confusion. "It has no value and no purpose beyond what we assign to it. Your emotional attachment defies all logic." Ethan reached the platform and looked down at the Bryn who had stopped struggling and was now watching him with those deep, dark eyes. He could see the pain in its gaze and the fear, and something else too, something that looked almost like hope. "Because it is suffering," Ethan said simply, as he met the instructor's stare without flinching. "And that should be enough reason to help if we can." Silence hung in the air for a long moment before Vornax made a sound that might have been a sigh. "Very well," the instructor said as he stepped back from the table and gestured for Ethan to take his place. "You may attempt your treatment as a case study in human irrationality. The class will observe and document your behavior for future analysis." Ethan pulled his small medkit from his bag, with hands that trembled slightly, and he approached the table where the Bryn lay watching him. The creature flinched when he reached toward it, but did not try to bite or scratch. "It is okay," Ethan whispered softly as he gently lifted the injured leg. "I am not going to hurt you, and I am going to make the pain go away if I can." The wound was a deep cut that had become infected, probably from a piece of broken metal in the transport cage. Ethan cleaned it carefully with antiseptic solution, while the Bryn made soft sounds that were not quite whimpers and not quite purrs. He worked slowly and gently, speaking soft words the whole time, even though he knew the creature could not understand them. The sound of his voice seemed to calm it somehow, and gradually the trembling stopped, and the fear faded from those dark eyes. When the bandage was secure, Ethan stepped back, and the Bryn lifted its head to look at him. Then it did something that made the entire room fall silent. It reached out with one of its other legs and touched his hand, just briefly, before pulling back and settling into a peaceful rest on the table. "Fascinating," Vornax said with a tone that held no warmth. "The creature has formed an attachment based on perceived kindness. This is exactly the kind of inefficient bonding that more evolved species have learned to avoid." The students began recording the scene on their personal devices, and Ethan knew that this footage would spread through the academy within hours. He would become even more of a joke than he already was. "Humans," Rethkis announced loudly as he captured the moment on his tablet. "Too weak to let nature take its course. Remember this day when you wonder why their species will never matter in the grand scope of the galaxy." Ethan ignored the mockery and focused on the Bryn, who was now sleeping peacefully on the table. Its breathing was steady, and the pain lines around its eyes had smoothed away, and he decided that this small victory was worth any amount of ridicule. As the students filed out of the laboratory, Thessaly remained in her seat and watched the human gather his things. She had seen many strange things in her years at the academy, but nothing quite like what had happened today. The Bryn had trusted him. It had looked into his eyes and seen something that calmed its terror and eased its pain, and Thessaly could not stop wondering what that something was. She made another note in her journal and followed the crowd into the corridor, but her thoughts remained with the soft one and the wounded creature who had reached out to touch his hand. The video spread through the academy like wildfire, and within 2 days, every student on Station Velar 9 had seen the human kneeling beside the wounded Bryn and speaking to it like it was a frightened child. The comments ranged from mocking to disgusted to simply confused Ethan. Endured it all with his head held high, even though every laugh and every whisper cut into him like a knife. He had done what he believed was right, and he would not apologize for showing kindness to a creature in pain. The weeks passed slowly, and the mockery gradually faded into background noise as new dramas and new scandals captured the attention of the student body. Ethan was still the soft one, but at least people had stopped staring at him every time he walked into a room. Then the announcement came that changed everything. All students gathered in the great assembly hall as the academy's chancellor, an ancient being of living stone named Korath, rose to address them from the central podium. His voice echoed through the massive chamber like the grinding of continents. "The time has come for the trial of Vareth Ka," Korath announced, and a wave of excited murmuring swept through the crowd. "And all students in their second year or above are required to participate. This is the test that separates those who deserve to graduate from those who do not." Ethan felt his blood run cold as the chancellor continued speaking. He had heard stories about this trial from older students, and none of those stories had happy endings. "The trial will take place on the jungle moon of Verathka," Korath explained as holographic images filled the air above the podium, "where you will navigate hostile terrain to locate a signal beacon and return to the extraction point within 48 hours. Failure to return in time results in automatic expulsion from the academy." The images showed a world of endless green, a moon covered in dense jungle that seemed to pulse with dangerous life. Massive trees stretched toward a sky choked with clouds, and shadows moved between the trunks with predatory grace. "But the terrain is not your greatest challenge," Korath continued as the images shifted to show something that made Ethan's breath catch in his throat. "Because Vareth Ka is home to the creatures that gave the moon its name." The Vareth appeared on the holographic display, and gasps echoed through the hall. It was enormous, easily 6 meters long, with a body covered in armored scales that gleamed like polished obsidian and claws that curved like scimitars dripping with venom. "The Varath are apex predators of the highest order," Korath said, with something like respect in his ancient voice. "And they have killed over 200 Academy students since the trial began 4 centuries ago. They are intelligent, territorial, and absolutely merciless." Rethkis leaned forward in his seat with excitement burning in his yellow eyes. This was the kind of challenge his warrior culture had prepared him for, and he could not wait to prove his worth against such a magnificent beast. "Students may carry defensive tools but no lethal weapons," Korath continued, "and the only approved strategy is to evade and escape. Engagement with the Varath is forbidden and will likely result in death." The hall buzzed with nervous energy as students began discussing strategies and forming alliance groups. The Kethra clustered together to plan their hive mind evasion formations. While the Sauroch boasted about their natural armor and superior reflexes, Ethan sat alone in the back of the hall and studied the images of the Verath with careful attention. Something about the creature fascinated him beyond the obvious terror it inspired, and he found himself wondering what it would be like to see one up close. After the assembly ended, he made his way to the Academy's archive and began searching through old records of previous trials. Most of the data focused on attack patterns and kill statistics, but Ethan was looking for something different. He spent hours scrolling through footage and survivor testimonies, and gradually a pattern began to emerge that nobody else seemed to have noticed. The Verath were most aggressive when they were wounded, and injured specimens attacked with a ferocity that far exceeded their healthy counterparts. Why? Ethan muttered to himself as he studied the data. Why would pain make them more dangerous instead of less? A voice from behind him made him jump in his seat. Researching your own death? Rethkis asked with a cruel smile as he looked over Ethan's shoulder at the screen. I suppose that is fitting for the soft one who thinks wounds should be healed instead of culled. Ethan closed the archive files and stood to face the Sauroch, who towered over him by nearly a full meter. I am just trying to understand them, Ethan replied calmly, because understanding something is the first step to surviving it. Rethkis laughed and shook his head with pity in his reptilian eyes. You cannot understand a Verath, human. You can only run from it and hope your legs carry you faster than its hunger. Perhaps you can try bandaging its feelings when it is eating you alive. The Sauroch walked away, still laughing, and Ethan returned to his research with renewed determination. There was something here, something important that everyone else had missed, because they were too focused on fear and strength to see it. The night before the trial, Ethan lay in his dormitory bed and stared at the ceiling while his mind raced through everything he had learned. The Verath were predators, yes, but they were also intelligent and territorial, which meant they had reasons for their behavior beyond simple hunger. Wounded Veraths were more aggressive, and that aggression seemed defensive rather than predatory. They were not attacking to hunt, but attacking to protect, and that distinction might mean the difference between life and death. His tablet buzzed with an incoming message, and he opened it to find a brief note from an unknown sender. I saw what you did with the Bryn, the message read, and I will be watching tomorrow to see what you do with the Verath. Good luck, soft one. The signature was a simple drawing of a feather, and Ethan smiled despite his fear. Thessaly had been watching him since the day he first spoke up in class, and he had noticed her quiet attention even if he had never acknowledged it. Tomorrow, he would face the most dangerous creature he had ever encountered, and every student in the academy expected him to fail. They thought his compassion made him weak, and his kindness made him prey. But Ethan had spent his whole life being underestimated, and he had learned that sometimes the things people called weaknesses were actually strengths waiting to be discovered. He closed his eyes and tried to sleep, knowing that the morning would bring challenges beyond anything he had ever faced. The jungle moon waited for him with its shadows and its monsters, and somewhere in that green darkness, the Verath hunted with patience and intelligence. The soft one was about to show the galaxy what human compassion could really do. The transport ship descended through clouds of green mist and landed in a clearing surrounded by trees so tall their tops disappeared into the haze above. Ethan stepped onto the soft jungle floor and felt the humid air wrap around him like a warm, wet blanket. All around him, students scattered in different directions, some in groups and some alone, all of them driven by the same desperate need to find the beacon and escape this deadly moon. The clock had started, and they had 48 hours to prove their worth. Ethan checked his pack one more time before choosing a direction and pushing into the undergrowth. He carried water and rations and basic medical supplies, along with a small sonic deterrent that was supposed to discourage predators, but which he suspected would do nothing against a Verath. The jungle was alive with sounds, strange calls and rustling leaves and the distant crash of something massive moving through the trees. Every shadow seemed to hide teeth, and every branch seemed ready to reach down and grab him. He walked for hours, navigating by the position of the sun when he could see it through the canopy and by his compass when he could not. The beacon signal pulsed on his tracker device, still many kilometers away through terrain that grew more difficult with every step. As the first night fell, he found shelter in a hollow beneath a fallen tree and tried to sleep while the jungle screamed around him. Somewhere in the darkness, a student screamed too, a sound of pure terror that cut off suddenly and completely. Ethan did not sleep that night. The second day brought exhaustion and fear and the constant awareness that death waited around every corner. He saw other students occasionally, running through the trees with wild eyes and trembling hands, but nobody stopped to talk or help. The emergency extraction signals began around midday, bright flares of light that shot into the sky as students gave up and called for rescue. Each flare meant another failure, another being who could not complete the trial. By afternoon, Ethan was lost. His compass had stopped working, his tracker showed only static, and the jungle all looked the same in every direction he turned. He pushed forward anyway because stopping meant certain death. The clearing appeared without warning, a break in the endless green where sunlight streamed down through a gap in the canopy. Ethan stepped into the open space and froze as his brain struggled to process what his eyes were seeing. A Vareth stood at the far edge of the clearing, and it was everything the stories had promised and more. Its body was a mountain of muscle and armored scales. Its claws gleamed with venom in the afternoon light, and its eyes burned with intelligence that seemed almost human in its intensity. But something was wrong. The creature was not charging toward him with the murderous speed the records had described. Instead, it stood unsteadily on 3 legs, while the 4th was held close to its body. Ethan looked closer and saw that the front paw was impaled by a jagged piece of metal, probably debris from some ancient crash site that had been swallowed by the jungle long ago. The wound was swollen and infected, and greenish fluid oozed from around the edges of the metal shard. The Vareth growled when it saw him, a sound that vibrated through his bones and made every instinct scream at him to run, but instead of attacking it, shifted its massive body to the side, positioning itself between Ethan and something hidden in the brush behind it. He understood then. This was not a hunter looking for prey. This was a parent protecting its young. In the shadows behind the Varath, he could see movement. Small shapes with the same obsidian scales and intelligent eyes peering out at him from a nest of woven branches. There were 3 of them, juvenile Vareths no bigger than large dogs, and they watched him with curiosity rather than fear. The mother Vareth growled again, but the sound was weaker this time, pain evident in every note. She was injured and terrified and trying desperately to protect her children from a threat she could not run from. Ethan made a decision that every other student in the academy would have called insane. He lowered himself slowly to his knees and held his hands out where the Varath could see them. Then he spoke in the same soft voice he had used with the Bryn all those weeks ago. "I know you are scared," he said gently, "and I know you are in pain. I am not going to hurt you or your babies. I promise." The Vareth watched him with those burning eyes, muscles coiled to strike, but she did not attack. Something in his voice or his posture made her hesitate, and that hesitation gave him a chance. Moving with agonizing slowness, Ethan opened his pack and pulled out his medkit. He showed the supplies to the Varath as if she could understand what they were, explaining each item in his calm, quiet voice. "This will help with the infection," he said as he held up a tube of antibiotic cream, "and this will numb the pain, so I can remove that metal from your paw. I need you to trust me, just for a few minutes." The jungle fell silent around them, as if the entire moon was holding its breath. Even the insects stopped their chirping and the birds stopped their calls, and the only sound was Ethan's heartbeat pounding in his ears. He crawled forward on his knees, moving inches at a time, and the Vareth let him come. Her eyes never left his face, and her muscles never relaxed. But she did not strike. When he finally reached her injured paw, he could see the full extent of the damage. The metal had been there for days, maybe weeks, and the infection had spread deep into the tissue. This creature had been suffering for so long, protecting her children while her own body slowly poisoned itself. "This is going to hurt for just a moment," Ethan whispered as he gripped the metal shard. "But then it will feel so much better." He pulled the shard free in one quick motion, and the Vareth roared, a sound of pain and rage that shook the trees around them. But still she did not attack, even as Ethan worked quickly to clean the wound and apply the antibiotic cream and wrap the paw in clean bandages. When he was finished, he sat back on his heels and looked up at the massive creature who could have killed him 100 times over. The Vareth looked back at him, and something passed between them that went beyond words or species. A low rumble came from her throat, but it was not a growl. It was something softer, something almost like the purr the Bryn had made when its pain finally faded. Then she stepped aside, and the path through the clearing lay open before him. She was letting him pass. This apex predator who had killed hundreds of beings just like him, she was showing him mercy because he had shown mercy first. Ethan rose to his feet and walked past her on trembling legs. One of the juvenile Vareths crept out of the nest and sniffed at his ankle before scampering back to its mother, and Ethan smiled despite the tears that streamed down his face. In the trees above the clearing, hidden among the branches, Thessaly watched with wide eyes and a racing heart. She had followed him since the landing, curious about what the soft one would do when faced with real danger, and now she had her answer. She activated her recording device with shaking hands and captured the image of the human walking away from the Vareth, who watched him go with something like respect in her ancient eyes. This footage would change everything. The beacon appeared through the trees like a pillar of golden light reaching toward the clouds, and Ethan stumbled toward it with the last of his strength. He had been walking for hours since the clearing, his body running on nothing but adrenaline and the memory of what had happened with the Vareth. He reached the beacon with trembling hands and activated the extraction signal. The device confirmed his completion of the trial and transmitted his location to the transport ship waiting in orbit above the jungle moon. Within 30 minutes, a shuttle descended through the canopy, and Ethan collapsed into the passenger hold, surrounded by a handful of other students who had also managed to complete the trial. Most of them were injured, all of them were exhausted, and none of them looked at him with the mockery he had grown used to seeing. The ride back to Station Valar 9 was quiet. Word had already begun to spread through the communication channels. Fragments of a story that seemed too impossible to be true, and students whispered among themselves while casting glances at the human who sat alone in the corner. When the shuttle docked at the academy, a crowd was waiting. Instructor Vornax stood at the front with all 4 arms crossed over his chest, and an expression on his face that Ethan could not read. And behind him stood hundreds of students who had watched Thessaly's footage spread through every device on the station. "Ethan Cole," Vornax called out as the human stepped off the shuttle. "You will come with me to the assembly hall immediately. There are questions that require answers." Ethan followed the instructor through corridors that fell silent as he passed. Students stepped aside and stared at him with expressions ranging from disbelief to confusion to something that might have been respect. And he felt like he was walking through a dream that he could not wake from. The assembly hall was packed with every student and faculty member the academy could hold. Chancellor Korath sat on his stone throne at the center of the stage, and massive holographic screens displayed the footage that had changed everything. There was Ethan kneeling before the Vareth, speaking softly, reaching for her wounded paw. There was the moment of extraction when the creature roared, but did not strike. There was the bandaging and the medicine and the incredible sight of the most dangerous predator in the sector, stepping aside to let a human pass unharmed. "Explain," Vornax demanded as he gestured toward the screens. "Explain how you survived an encounter that should have killed you before you could even raise your hands." Ethan looked at the footage playing on loop above him, and then at the thousands of faces waiting for his answer. He thought about all the mockery and the laughter and the constant reminders that compassion was weakness, and he took a deep breath before speaking. "She was a parent protecting her children," he said simply, "and she was injured and afraid. She was not a monster hunting for prey. She was a mother in pain who could not run from a threat she did not understand." The hall murmured with confusion, and Rethkis pushed his way to the front of the crowd with disbelief written across his scaled face. "That is impossible," the Sauroch declared loudly. "The Verath are mindless killers who attack everything that enters their territory. They do not feel fear, and they certainly do not feel gratitude." "Every creature feels fear," Ethan replied as he met the Sauroch's eyes without flinching. "And every creature in pain becomes more dangerous, not because they are evil, but because they are desperate. I did not try to fight her or run from her. I tried to help her." "And you believed that would work?" Vornax asked with something new in his voice. Something that sounded almost like curiosity instead of contempt. "I did not know if it would work," Ethan admitted. "But I knew that if I ran, she would definitely attack because that is what fear does. It makes us strike at anything that moves, because we are too scared to think clearly." He paused and looked around the hall at all the faces watching him. "I took a chance that compassion might reach her when nothing else could," he continued. "And I was right. Not because I am special, but because kindness is a language that every living thing can understand." Silence fell over the assembly hall as his words sank in. Then Chancellor Korath rose from his stone throne, and the room held its collective breath. "The Verath have killed over 200 students in 4 centuries of trials," the ancient being said in his grinding voice. "And not once has any student attempted what this human attempted. Not once has anyone thought to see the beast as something other than a threat to be fled or fought." He turned his stone eyes toward Ethan with an expression that might have been wonder. "You showed mercy to a creature that has never received mercy," Korath continued, "and in return it showed mercy to you. This is not weakness, it is a form of strength we have forgotten how to recognize." Rethkis opened his mouth to protest, but no words came out. He looked at the footage still playing on the screens, and at the human who had walked past a Verath unharmed, and for the first time in his life, he did not know what to say. After the assembly ended, Thessaly found Ethan in the corridor and fell into step beside him without speaking. They walked in comfortable silence until they reached the observation deck where the stars spun slowly past the windows. "I owe you an apology," she said finally, as she looked out at the cosmos. "Because I watched you and recorded you like you were some kind of experiment, and you deserved better than that." "You showed everyone what happened," Ethan replied with a small smile. "And that took courage, too. Not everyone would have shared footage that challenged everything their culture believed." Rethkis appeared in the doorway and stood there awkwardly for a long moment before approaching them. His usual swagger was gone, replaced by uncertainty that looked strange on his proud face. "How did you know?" he asked quietly. "How did you know? The Verath would not kill you." Ethan considered the question carefully before answering. "I did not know," he said honestly. "But I knew that sometimes the bravest thing is not fighting. Sometimes it is choosing to understand instead." The Sauroch nodded slowly and walked away without another word, but Ethan could see something shifting behind his yellow eyes. In the weeks that followed, the academy quietly began to change. A new elective appeared in the course catalog called Terran Empathy Studies, and students who had once mocked Ethan now approached him with questions about human philosophy and the strange strength of kindness. One morning, a message arrived from the wildlife monitors on Verath Ka, and it contained a single image that made Ethan smile. It showed a female Verath leading 3 healthy juveniles through the jungle, and her front paw was healed and strong. The soft one looked at the image for a long time before saving it to his personal files. He had come to the academy as a joke, a representative of a species that everyone believed had failed to evolve past its primitive emotions. But the galaxy was beginning to learn what humans had always known. Compassion was not a flaw. They had failed to evolve past. It was a gift they had evolved toward. And that made all the difference.